Hi guys, we're back after spending 2 weeks on some fingerprinting. We're going to spend the next 2 weeks on more fingerprinting. So these 2 weeks, you're going to be taking a look more intently at the three different types of fingerprints that are out there. So the three types of print patterns. Hopefully you started to take a little look at your own fingerprints, and you may have noticed that you either had a loop, a whirl, a loop, an arch, or a whirl. And those are the three types of fingerprint patterns that all different people could possibly have. Now, if you remember, your prints form in the the third month of fetal development. No two people have the same print. People oftentimes will ask me, they'll say, well, what if you have identical twins? They came from the same egg. Doesn't matter. They are still going to have different prints because their fingerprints are not part of their DNA. It's just a random pattern that develops between the amniotic fluid and the epidermis while it's forming. So we've got these loops, arches, and whirls. Let's take a look at our first one. We've got a loop. A loop is found in about 65% of the population. So most people have one or more loops on their fingers. Now, just because you have a loop doesn't mean that all your fingers are going to be loops, but at least 65% of the people out there have them. You know that it's a loop because the print enters and exits on the same side or on one side of the print. The other thing that a loop has to have, and it's highlighted here in yellow, it has to have a delta. And you may have learned about deltas when you took earth science. Social studies talks about deltas. They're found at the mouth of a river. Oftentimes they're an area where civilizations would develop. So this triangle-shaped pattern is called delta. A loop must have at least one delta. The other thing it has, if the loop opens towards your little finger, it's called an ulnar loop. If it opens towards your thumb, it's called a radial loop. Next one here is an arch. Only 5% of the population has one or more arches. So dig around through your fingers, take a look. If you have an arch, that's a pretty distinct print because only 5% of the population, and I don't mean the United States, I mean the whole world has an arch. The print enters on one side and it leaves on the opposite side. They have no deltas. In fact, the whole thing itself looks like a delta, but there's no like triangle where all three kind of like that. They could be called a plain arch or a tented arch. And the tented arches you can see in this picture, they're real kind of spiky. This particular one has one line that goes right up the center. Our third type here is a whirl. 35% of our population has whirls, and the print creates an enclosed circle. Now this one looks like you could follow the little line around and around and around and around and around, and it whirls around. That is what most people's whirls do. Do you notice two things on this? See these two things? These two things are the deltas. So to be a whirl, it has to have two deltas. If there's only one delta on that print, then it must have been a loop. The lines running between the deltas in here, they must be clear, they must be distinct. So the next 2 weeks, you're going to spend a little time watching videos. This video is going to show you the proper way to roll out your fingerprints. This one's going to show you the proper way to dust for prints. Two other ways that we can lift those latent or invisible prints is we could use iodine or we could use super glue. Okay? Now, if you are in the school at all, if you're doing any kind of learning in the school, email me and I will bring you some of these things to play around with. But just for the next couple of minutes, let me just kind of show you some of the stuff that we have that you could be playing with if we're in class. And this one, this is an ink pad. And one of the assignments I ask you to do for the next 2 weeks is to ink your prints. So I realize if you're not in school, you're not going to have one of these ink pads. So you can easily use, well, Crayola comes off easily, so I would suggest using some kind of a water-soluble marker. If you don't have that, if you have a permanent marker, that would possibly work. Excuse me. Some people found that they could actually use pencil graphite, and so then they would rub their finger around in that. But so whatever kind of medium you have for your finger to get your print, roll your finger around in it. Okay, it's nice and messy. When you watch the video, they're going to show you that you always roll your finger away from the body, and you just do one roll with it. Let's see if you can see this at all. It's a little blurry. That ends up being a loop, a little bit blurry. Now you definitely do not want to roll back and forth, because you do that and you're going to just end up mushing the print. So one roll is all you get with it. So hopefully you'll have something at your house so that you can roll out the prints, or if you're in school, I'll bring you the supplies in school. Next thing, dusting. We have a couple different types of brushes here. This one's a little bit like a feather duster. Just kind of fluff it up. We've got some different powders, and you just put a tiny bit of powder. Maybe that was more than a tiny bit of powder. You just get a tiny little bit on your brush here. And I've got a binder that I put some of the fingerprint on. And the video will talk about some different ways that you can dust for prints. But you could twirl it, you could swirl it. Some people talk about like doing a dab technique. All right, so this is some of the stuff that you could do if you're able to come into the school. We also end up created these little containers here, and we put some super glue on a cotton ball, put a piece of glass in there with your fingerprint, close it up, throw a heat lamp on it overnight, and the super glue ends up evaporating. And then the other kind that we did, it was called an iodine print. So you're going to be watching the videos. If you're lucky enough to be at school to come and borrow this stuff, you can. So you can see that the container is all stained, and that's because we put just a couple iodine crystals in there with a piece of paper. Close it up, and within 30 minutes, your fingerprint starts to show up. This is one other kind of fingerprinting, like a powder. This fingerprint powder, and I haven't played with this a whole lot. So this thing is actually magnetic. And so you can see when I get up close to it, it pulls some of the powder in. And there are many investigators who like using this stuff better. So if I put my print there, you can see just going back and forth on it. One of the problems with the magnetic powder is it's a little heavier, a little bit coarser. And so if you have a really fine fingerprint, sometimes these tiny magnetic particles raking through the fingerprint can actually smear it and damage it. So it's really just a matter of preference and what people are most comfortable using. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. I think that's about it. Like I said, it's going to be a bunch of videos. Oh, I just thought of one other thing that you're going to be doing. It's called the Hold It handout. That's what it was. And this one you're going to actually see pictures of a bunch of different things. So maybe it's like a pencil. And what you need to do is figure out what part of your finger leaves a, a print on the fingerprint or a print on the pencil. So you're going to have a whole bunch of different things that you're going to end up using. Okay, stop in at my office hours for any kind of help. Okay.